Today, I'm calling for 3 bold reforms to restore trust and accountability to the court and our democracy.
President Biden has called for major reforms to the U.S. Supreme Court, including term limits, an enforceable code of ethics, and a constitutional amendment to limit the presidential immunity that the court granted last month. Vice President Kamala Harris, the presumptive Democratic presidential nominee, swiftly endorsed Biden's proposals, saying there is a clear crisis of confidence facing the Supreme Court. These popular reforms will help to restore confidence in the court, strengthen our democracy, and ensure that no one is above the law. While Biden can call on Congress to pass such measures, he himself cannot unilaterally alter the court. It's ultimately up to Congress to pass the reforms that Biden is advocating for. Biden explained his 3 bold reforms in a Washington Post op-ed to restore trust and accountability to the court and our democracy. Biden first proposes an amendment to the U.S. Constitution titled the No One is Above the Law Amendment, a direct rebuke to the U.S. Supreme Court's ruling in Donald Trump's federal election subversion case that granted presidents broad immunity from criminal prosecution.
The president must answer to the law. The president is accountable in the exercise of the great power of the presidency. We're a nation of laws, not kings and dictators.
But passing a constitutional amendment is no easy feat. The Constitution has only been successfully amended 27 times in the history of our country. In order for an amendment to be ratified, it must be approved by a 2/3 majority in both the House and the Senate, as well as 3/4 of all state legislatures across the country. Earlier this week, Rep. Joe Morelli of New York introduced a similar amendment to reverse the Supreme Court's immunity ruling.
What the court said is the President of the United States, in his official or her official duties, could assassinate a head of state, could assassinate an American citizen, and would not be held accountable by the courts or by Congress. It is the most un-American decision in the history of the court.
In addition to explicitly stating that presidents do not have immunity from criminal prosecution for official acts, Morelli's proposed amendment would also include a section stating that presidents cannot pardon themselves. The second reform that Biden calls for is establishing term limits for Supreme Court justices. Biden points out that there have been term limits for presidents for nearly 75 years, and that the United States is the only major constitutional democracy that gives lifetime seats to its high court. Specifically, Biden proposes a system where a president appoints a new justice every 2 years, and that justice spends only 18 years in active service on the high court.
The bipartisan commission I convened analyzed various term limit structures. Based on their report, I believe the best structure is the 18-year term limit.
Biden's proposal mirrors similar bills introduced by Democrats in recent years to impose term limits on Supreme Court justices, all of which have failed to advance. The third and perhaps most feasible proposal is creating a binding code of ethics for the Supreme Court. Last November, the court adopted a non-binding code of ethics following months of public pressure due to numerous ethical scandals tied to Justices Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito. But many immediately called out the code for lacking an enforcement mechanism.
Supreme Court's current ethics code is weak and, even more frightening, voluntary. Any code of Congress must be enforceable. Under the reform I propose, justice would be required to disclose gifts.
The president argues justices should be required to disclose gifts, refrain from public political activity, and recuse themselves from cases in which they or their spouses have financial or other conflicts of interest. Every other federal judge is bound by an enforceable code of conduct, and there is no reason for the Supreme Court to be exempt. In addition to failing to disclose numerous lavish gifts and vacations from GOP megadonors, Justice Clarence Thomas's wife, Ginny, allegedly pressured White House staff to overturn the 2020 election and sent emails to state legislators asking them to vote for a fake set of Trump electors. Thomas refused to recuse himself from cases involving January 6th or the 2020 election despite public pressure to do so. Justice Alito flew flags known to support the Stop the Steal movement on multiple of his properties, but claimed that they were his wife's flags. In a letter to Congress explaining his reasoning for not recusing himself from Donald Trump's immunity case, Alito wrote, "My wife is fond of flying flags. I am not. My wife is an independently minded private citizen. She makes her own decisions, and I honor her right to do so." In June, a group of House Democrats introduced the Supreme Court Ethics and Investigations Act, which, among other things, would create an investigative body that would report to Congress and establish an ethics council to advise justices on ethics rules, including recusal and disclosure requirements. But the legislation, like other SCOTUS reform proposals, did not advance to a committee, much less a full vote on the House or Senate floor. Notably missing from Biden's list of reforms is a proposal to expand the number of seats on the Supreme Court, a much more controversial reform that the president himself has criticized in the past.
I think if we start the process of trying to expand the court, we're going to politicize it maybe forever in a way that is not healthy.
Nevertheless, other Democratic lawmakers have pushed legislation to expand the court. Last week, Senator Ed Markey, a Massachusetts Democrat, renewed his push for a measure that would expand the court by adding 4 additional seats.
I think the White House is very well aware of where we are and what we think is the best, fastest, most direct and constitutional way to bring this Supreme Court back.
President Biden ended his calls for reforms with this: "We can and must prevent the abuse of presidential power. We can and must restore the public's faith in the Supreme Court. We can and must strengthen the guardrails of democracy. In America, no one is above the law. In America, the people rule." Thanks for watching Democracy Docket. If you want to stay up to date on the latest voting and election news, make sure to subscribe to our newsletters. And if you want to support our work, you can become a Democracy Docket member and you can receive lots of exclusive content, access to live events, and more, and you'll be supporting our work. You can click the link on the screen right here or in the description of this video. I'm Sophie, and I'll see you next time.